Remember that the moment those flashing lights appear in your rearview mirror, your body undergoes a physiological transformation that is entirely natural, but can be incredibly distracting when you need your mind to be at its sharpest. This sudden surge of adrenaline often leads to a racing heart, shallow breathing, and a narrowing of your peripheral vision, making it difficult to process information or remember the basic steps you have rehearsed in your head for an encounter like this. As we move through the heart of April, the roads are becoming busier, with people enjoying the shift in weather, perhaps navigating those unpredictable spring showers that can make the asphalt slick and the driving conditions more demanding for everyone. It is in these moments, when the world is waking up and the days are stretching longer toward the summer months, that a simple traffic stop can feel like a major crisis if you are not prepared to manage your own internal state. Your goal during these first few seconds is not to argue the merits of the stop or to worry about the final outcome, but to focus entirely on bringing your vehicle to a safe and controlled halt in a way that signals your cooperation and your commitment to safety. This involves signaling early, choosing a spot that provides ample room for both your vehicle and the patrol car, and ensuring you are not creating a hazard for other drivers who might be distracted by the vibrant greens of the blooming trees or the glare of the afternoon sun. Thinking clearly is your most valuable asset during any encounter with law enforcement, yet it is the first thing that tends to fail when the stress of the situation takes hold. When you are sitting in that driver's seat, waiting for the officer to approach, take a moment to realize that your nervous system is essentially trying to protect you with a fight or flight response, but its methods are often counterproductive to a calm, legal interaction. By acknowledging this physical response, you can begin to consciously lower your heart rate through slow, deliberate breathing. This is not just about personal comfort. It is about maintaining the cognitive bandwidth necessary to listen carefully to questions and respond with the precision that the law requires. This time of year often brings a sense of renewal, but on the road, it also brings increased enforcement as departments focus on public safety during the transition into the high travel seasons. Understanding that a traffic stop is a procedural event for the officer helps you decouple the situation from your personal identity, allowing you to remain a neutral observer of your own experience. You are not a suspect in your own mind. You are a driver, participating in a highly regulated interaction, and keeping that distinction clear is the key to avoiding the common pitfalls of nervousness that can lead to misunderstood statements or unnecessary escalations. The feeling of a typical stop is one of sudden vulnerability, where the power imbalance is palpable, and the silence between the siren stopping and the officer's first word can feel like an eternity. It is during this window of time that many people make the mistake of overthinking their past or worrying about what the officer might find or ask, rather than focusing on the present moment and the immediate environment. If you find your mind racing toward your personal history or wondering how to answer probing questions about your background, remind yourself that the law provides a framework for these interactions that is designed to be followed step by step. You do not need to solve the entire problem in the first 30 seconds. Instead, focus on the immediate physical environment. Ensure the car is in park, the engine is off, the windows are rolled down enough for clear communication, and your hands are placed visibly on the steering wheel. By grounding yourself in these physical actions, you provide your brain with a script to follow, which effectively pushes back against the chaotic thoughts that often lead to verbal stumbles. The transition from the cool, crisp mornings of early spring to the warmer, more active afternoons we are seeing now mirrors the transition you must make from the high-stress onset of a stop to the controlled, professional demeanor required for the duration of the encounter. Your ability to stay grounded is what allows you to eventually address more complex questions, like those regarding your record or your destination, with the level-headedness that protects your interests without creating unnecessary friction or suspicion. As the officer approaches the vehicle, the focus shifts from your internal state to the physical environment of the cabin and the initial verbal exchange. It is standard practice to keep your hands clearly visible on the steering wheel, often at the 10 and 2 positions, until the officer specifically asks you to do otherwise. This simple gesture is one of the most effective ways to de-escalate a situation before a single word is even spoken, as it addresses the primary concern of any law enforcement officer: their own physical safety. If it is dark outside, turning on your interior dome light is another proactive step that demonstrates transparency and helps the officer see that there are no immediate threats within the vehicle. When the officer reaches the window and begins the interaction, your tone should be polite and professional, much like you would use in a formal business meeting or a respectful conversation with a stranger. Using titles like officer or deputy is a common way to maintain a level of decorum that can prevent the atmosphere from becoming unnecessarily tense or confrontational. You should avoid any sudden movements, reaching for items before being asked, or exiting the vehicle unless specifically directed to do so by the officer, as these actions can be misinterpreted as a threat or an attempt to flee. When the request for your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance is made, it is important to understand that in almost every jurisdiction in the United States, providing these documents is a legal requirement during a lawful traffic stop. This is a procedural exchange of information, and resisting this request or engaging in a debate about the constitutionality of the stop at this specific moment is rarely productive. Instead of reaching for your glove box or center console immediately, it is often helpful to verbally announce your intentions to the officer. You might say something like, "My registration is in the glove box. May I reach for it now?" This verbal cue allows the officer to know exactly where your hands are going and why, removing the element of surprise from the interaction. By moving slowly and deliberately, you signal that you are in control of your actions and that you are not attempting to hide or retrieve anything other than the requested paperwork. The goal is to make the process as smooth and predictable as possible, which often leads to a shorter and less stressful encounter for both parties involved. It is also helpful to have these documents organized and easily accessible before you even start your engine, reducing the time you spend fumbling through a cluttered compartment while under the watchful eye of the law. During this exchange, you may find that the officer begins to ask questions that go beyond the simple request for documentation, such as where you are headed or where you are coming from. While it is important to remain polite and respectful, it is equally important to recognize that these questions are often part of a broader investigative process. You have the right to remain polite without necessarily being overly talkative. Many people feel a natural urge to fill the silence with explanations or justifications for their driving, but this can inadvertently lead to providing more information than is required. A simple, concise response is often the most effective way to navigate this part of the stop. If the officer asks about your record or your activities, you can maintain your professional demeanor while choosing your words with care. De-escalation is not just about what you say, but also about how you say it. Keeping your voice calm, avoiding sarcasm, and remaining focused on the immediate task of completing the document check will serve you better than any legal argument you might attempt to make on the side of the road. Your compliance with the administrative requirements of the stop, the identification, and the paperwork is a separate matter from the deeper investigative questions that might follow, and keeping those two concepts distinct in your mind is essential for protecting your interests while ensuring your immediate safety during the encounter. Once the initial exchange of identification is complete, the nature of the interaction may shift from a simple traffic enforcement stop to a more investigative phase. This is where you might encounter questions that seem casual, but are designed to elicit information that could be used as evidence or to establish probable cause for a search. A common question officers ask is whether you have anything illegal in the car, or perhaps a more direct request like, "You don't mind if I take a quick look around the vehicle, do you?" It is vital to understand that, under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, you are generally protected against unreasonable searches and seizures. In many circumstances, an officer needs your consent to search your vehicle if they do not have a warrant or probable cause. Probable cause is a high legal standard, requiring specific facts that would lead a reasonable person to believe that evidence of a crime is located in the vehicle. While the specific application of these rules can vary significantly from one state to another, the concept of consent is relatively universal. If you voluntarily agree to a search, the officer does not need a warrant or probable cause. This is why your response to such a request is a critical moment in the stop. You have the right to politely and clearly state that you do not consent to a search of your vehicle or your person. Saying, "Officer, I know you're just doing your job, but I do not consent to any searches," is a professional way to assert your rights without being confrontational or appearing suspicious. It is a common misconception that refusing a search makes you look guilty. In the eyes of the law, asserting a constitutional right is not evidence of criminal activity. In fact, many legal experts suggest that a blanket policy of not consenting to searches is the safest way to protect yourself, as it prevents any ambiguity about your intentions. Another important concept to grasp is the plain view doctrine, which allows an officer to seize evidence without a warrant if it is clearly visible from a place where they have a legal right to be. This means that if an officer is standing at your window during a lawful traffic stop and sees something illegal sitting on your passenger seat or floorboard, they may have the legal authority to search the vehicle based on that observation. This is why maintaining a clean and organized vehicle is not just a matter of aesthetics, but a practical step in managing a traffic stop. Similarly, what an officer hears, or in many jurisdictions, what they smell, can contribute to the establishment of probable cause. For instance, the smell of burnt marijuana or alcohol may be sufficient in some states to justify a warrantless search, while other states have recently passed laws that limit the use of smell as the sole basis for a search following the legalization of certain substances. Because these laws are in a constant state of flux and vary so much across state lines, it is impossible to give a single rule that applies to every driver in every city. You must be aware that an officer's training often includes techniques to gain your cooperation through psychological framing, making a search seem like a mere formality or a way to clear things up quickly. However, the general principle remains that you should never feel pressured into giving up your right to privacy out of a sense of obligation or fear. Even if you believe you have nothing to hide, consenting to a search can lead to complications, such as an officer finding an item left behind by a previous passenger that you were unaware of, or misinterpreting a legal item as something illicit. By maintaining a firm but polite stance on consent, you keep the interaction focused on the reason for the stop, rather than opening the door to a wide-ranging investigation that could extend the duration of your encounter significantly. Understanding the limits of an officer's authority during a stop also involves knowing when they can order you or your passengers out of the vehicle. Under federal law, an officer can typically order the driver and passengers out of the car for their own safety during a lawful stop, a rule established by the Supreme Court to protect law enforcement. This is not the same as a search of the vehicle itself, but it can be a precursor to a frisk or a pat-down for weapons if the officer has a reasonable suspicion that you may be armed and dangerous. This is often referred to as a Terry stop or a Terry frisk, and it is limited to a search for weapons, not a general search for contraband. Again, the threshold for this is lower than probable cause, but it is not unlimited. Throughout this entire process, your best course of action is to follow all direct lawful orders, while clearly stating your lack of consent for any actual searches of the car's interior, trunk, or locked containers. Avoid physical resistance at all costs, even if you believe the search is unlawful or that the officer is exceeding their authority. The roadside is not the place to litigate the legality of an officer's actions. That is what the courtroom and the formal complaint process are for. If a search is conducted over your objection, the fact that you clearly stated your lack of consent will be a vital part of your legal defense later. By staying calm and knowledgeable about these high-level concepts, you ensure that you are not accidentally waiving your rights during a moment of stress or confusion. And you maintain a factual record of the interaction that your attorney can use if necessary. There comes a point in some traffic stops where the line between a simple citation for a moving violation and a deeper criminal investigation begins to blur. And recognizing this escalation edge is perhaps the most critical skill a driver can possess. This shift often happens when an officer moves away from the reason for the stop, like a broken taillight or a failure to signal, and begins asking probing questions about your past, your associations, or your personal history. One of the most common and challenging questions you might face is whether or not you have a criminal record. While your instinct might be to provide a lengthy explanation, to defend your character, or to minimize a past mistake, you must understand that this is the moment where the Fifth Amendment's protection against self-incrimination becomes your primary safeguard. In this specific scenario, the most effective and legally sound response is not a lie, nor is it a detailed confession. It is the clear, polite invocation of your right to remain silent. You might say, "Officer, I am not going to discuss my personal history or my past, and I am choosing to exercise my right to remain silent." If the officer continues to press the issue, you can reinforce this by stating that you would like to speak with an attorney before answering any further questions. This is not an admission of guilt, regardless of how an officer might frame it in the moment. It is a fundamental principle of the American legal system that you are not required to provide the evidence used against you, and asserting this right is a neutral act that preserves your options for the future. When you reach this escalation edge, the atmosphere of the stop can change, and the pressure to speak can feel overwhelming. The officer may suggest that things will go easier for you if you are just honest, or they might imply that only people with something to hide refuse to answer simple questions. It is essential to stay factual and maintain your composure during these psychological maneuvers. You are not being combative by choosing silence. You are being precise. If the questioning persists beyond the scope of the original traffic stop, you have the right to ask a very specific question of your own. Officer, am I being detained or am I free to go? If the officer informs you that you are free to go, you should calmly and safely depart the scene. However, if the officer states that you are being detained, you must recognize that you are now in a high-stakes legal situation where every word you say can and likely will be recorded and used in a later proceeding. At this point, the most important thing you can do is to stop talking. You do not need to explain why you are remaining silent again, and you do not need to respond to further provocations or observations. Your silence is a shield, and while it might feel uncomfortable or even rude in a social context, in a legal context, it is your most powerful tool. You must remain physically compliant, keeping your hands visible and following all direct orders to move or exit the vehicle. But your verbal participation should effectively end once you have invoked your rights. The philosophy behind staying silent and requesting counsel is rooted in the fact that the roadside is an environment of inherent coercion, where you lack the resources, the time, and the calm environment necessary to make informed legal decisions. Even if you have a completely clean record, answering questions about it can lead to inconsistencies or misunderstandings that an officer might use to justify further detention or a search. For example, you might forget a minor infraction from years ago, and if the officer discovers it during a computer check, your honest mistake could be characterized as a lie, creating the very suspicion you were trying to avoid. By sticking to a firm policy of not discussing your history or anything beyond the immediate requirements of the traffic stop, you eliminate the risk of accidental self-incrimination. Staying safe during these edges means understanding that you will not win an argument on the shoulder of a highway. If an officer chooses to arrest you or search your car despite your objections and your silence, you must let them proceed without physical resistance. Your safety is the priority, and the legal battle is one that is fought with the help of a qualified attorney in a courtroom, where the rules of evidence and constitutional protections are strictly enforced. By documenting the encounter mentally or through a passenger's observations, and by remaining silent, you provide your future legal counsel with the best possible foundation to challenge any overreach that may have occurred during the stop. Once the patrol car has pulled away and you have safely rejoined the flow of traffic, the interaction is not truly over. The most important work of documentation begins now. It is common to feel a rush of relief or a lingering sense of frustration, but you must channel that energy into a disciplined, factual recording of the events that just transpired. Find a safe location, such as a parking lot or a quiet side street away from the immediate scene, and take the time to write down every detail you can remember while it is still vivid in your mind. This is what we call a documentation mindset, where you treat the encounter as a series of data points rather than an emotional narrative. You should note the exact time and location of the stop, the name and badge number of the officer, which they are generally required to provide if asked, and the unit number of the patrol vehicle. If there were multiple officers present, try to describe their physical appearance and any specific actions they took, such as where they stood or whether they approached the passenger side of the car. Document the specific reason the officer gave for pulling you over and the exact sequence of questions they asked, especially focusing on those regarding your destination, your criminal history, or requests for consent to search. If you stated that you were choosing to remain silent or that you did not consent to a search, make a specific note of your exact words and the officer's immediate response. In the digital age, many drivers rely on dashcams or smartphone recordings, and while these are invaluable, they do not replace a written account that captures your subjective experience and the nuances of the conversation that a camera might miss. This record will be the primary tool your attorney uses if you need to challenge a citation, a search, or a detention in the future. Think of your documentation as a counter-narrative to the officer's official report. While the officer will be filling out their own logs and notes, their perspective is naturally framed by their training and objectives. Your goal is to provide an objective account of the conditions of the stop, the lighting, the weather, the volume of traffic, and the demeanor of the officer throughout the interaction. If you felt threatened, or if the officer's tone became aggressive, describe those elements clearly without using hyperbolic language. By maintaining this professional, documentation-focused attitude, you move from being a passive participant in the legal system to an active protector of your own rights. As we conclude this educational overview, it is essential to return to a fundamental truth. The law is a complex and living entity that changes constantly and varies significantly depending on your jurisdiction. The information provided in this series is intended for general educational purposes and to help you understand high-level legal concepts. It does not, under any circumstances, constitute personalized legal advice. Every traffic stop is unique, and the specific facts of your situation will dictate the legal outcome. Viewing this content or interacting with it does not create a lawyer-client relationship between you and the creator of this channel. Laws regarding traffic stops, searches, and self-incrimination can differ wildly from one state to another, and what is true in one part of the country may not apply in another. Because of this, you should always verify the specific statutes and case law in your local area. If you find yourself facing legal charges or believe your rights were violated during a stop, do not rely on a video or an educational guide. Instead, seek the counsel of a qualified attorney who is licensed to practice in your jurisdiction. A professional legal advocate can review the specifics of your case, evaluate the evidence, and provide the specialized guidance that an educational program simply cannot offer. Your goal as an informed driver is to stay safe, stay calm, and stay silent when necessary, ensuring that you have the best possible chance of a favorable outcome through the proper legal channels long after the flashing lights have disappeared from your mirror.